lived and studied in America for 15 years, in New York for 15 years, before coming back to Georgia in 2014 to shoot City of the Sun, his first feature-length documentary. In 2014, he produced very special short, Invisible Spaces, which has premiered, not only premiered at Cannes Film Festival and competed for Palme d'Or, but was the first film from independent Georgia to do so. So we were very happy back then, and we're still happy about it today. Not long after, like 2 years after, he it's a film by Dea Kulumbegashvili, directed by Dea Kulumbegashvili. 2 years later, again, he has produced and co-edited, if I'm not mistaken, another short that has also premiered at Cannes Film Festival, this time Director's Fortnight. Lete, and a year after that, in 2017, he has finished his documentary film, which has premiered, I think, at Berlinale, and since then it has traveled the world of festivals, of international festivals. It has garnered numerous prestigious awards, and till this day it is considered one of the greatest Georgian documentaries, modern documentaries. So I'm very pleased to have Rati as a guest today. And if that was not enough, I just have to say it. Rati is also a writer, a producer, and a lead actor. He also plays in 2020's film by Dea Kulumbegashvili, The Beginning, that if you don't know, it's a Georgian bid and leading contender for Oscars, for next Oscars that will be held in 2021. And also it has had its historical moment at San Sebastian, winning not one, not two, but four awards, one of them being a jury prize for best screenplay, which Rati received for writing. And yeah, so I think I don't want to make it a very long introduction, but as you may see, Rati is a very interesting person to talk to. So before I give him the floor, or a Zoom window, I would like to say that this masterclass will be interactive. If you have any questions, you see a message box down below that says Q&A. You just click on it, write your question. I'll do my best to read all of your questions, and that he will do his best to answer in a short period of time that we have. 1 hour will not be enough, I'm sure. Yeah, take it away, Rati, I think.
Anna, thank you very much for really overtly too generous introduction. Thank you. And you make it sound like I have some kind of formula, which I don't, hopefully, because once I figure out, just like every other filmmaker, some kind of formula, I think it will be time to retire, in a sense. I just want to check technically that there is no echo, and I'm using this wireless thing. It's okay? You can hear me fine?
No, we can hear you perfectly, I think. On my end, it's perfect. Yes.
Okay. So I'm very, very glad to be here somewhere in the virtual space. Thank you so much. Thanks to Nina. Thanks to the Tbilisi International Film Festival for giving me this opportunity. I'm really happy to be here. And, let me just say right out that, obviously I'm not here to peddle some kind of truth, some kind of higher truth that I know and others don't know. That's not the case. I don't know pretty much anything, and I'm here basically to explore what cinema is. I'm here to do my best to share that kind of journey into the unknown. And as Plotinus said, the flight of the alone to the alone, because I think that's what we filmmakers do, and that's what artists do at their best. This is and like I said, this is a kind of a weird situation where I don't see anyone, but my best experiences where I was able to interact with people and see them face to face. So of course, please feel free, if the technicality allows, to ask any questions, interrupt me, basically. You know, I thought about what to prepare and how to dive into this thing. And I came to the conclusion, just like all of the films that I did, just like everything that I do, is that I cannot really prepare, I cannot really structure what I'm about to embark on, including this class. This is, at its best, I hope, that we as filmmakers, we are, all of us, like moving together towards some kind of, in our pursuit of the ephemeral, towards some kind of universal mathematical language. And by mathematical language, I mean pure mathematics, because as we know, mathematics has been hijacked by the so-called scientific community, and there are two mathematics. One is pure mathematics, which is pure philosophy, and the other one is applied mathematics that engineers use. And I'm talking about pure mathematics in the truest sense of the word, something that the Indian genius Srinivas actually was swimming in, and his formulas that he was dreaming about, that was his primary, I guess, source of his mathematical formulas, which are even today being proven and being solved by the leading mathematicians of the world. And, you know, it's no mistake that I speak about mathematics, which actually by education I have no relation to. But I think pure mathematics is the field of intuition in which we as filmmakers all try to swim in a sense. And intuition is, at best times, it is what guides us, or should guide us. And you know, it's been my journey of discovery of what intuition is to me, and how I have approached in retrospect all of the things that I did, and how I work, and how I hope to continue working. And intuition plays a huge role in my work and in my life. Obviously, we're not going to talk about method and methodology, which is probably as important as intuition, because anyone can get lucky and make one amazing film, but if you don't have a method, and maybe on a higher level methodology, you cannot succeed again. It's just like poking in the dark, basically. But that would be too obvious to talk about that. You know, my journey has always been to trust that gut feeling that arises in all of us, and to try to develop it, even though I have very little sense of understanding how it works. Mm-hmm. Basically, even when I was working on our first short script with Dea, and then my feature film, there were certain things that would arise in my mind, you know, or in my imagination. And, you know, I've had a habit of trusting, even though I didn't understand most of these, let's say, images or sounds or colors. I've had a good habit of trusting them, because I know that they are there for a reason. And I'll try to explain what I mean. In a sense, whatever I believe, I truly believe that in a sense, whatever arises in your mind's eye, whatever, or maybe the sensation that arises in your body, is there for a reason. Because if it had no place in yourself and in your experience, it wouldn't be there in the first place. So even though I don't understand, or I cannot analyze why this or that emotion, or why this or that idea or image comes up, I always write it down. That's part of my method, and I put it aside. Of course, I try to poke at it and I try to analyze it, and I usually fail at it, and then I write it down and I put it aside. And just like clockwork, after many months or many years, I find myself at crossroads where I have some kind of block. I try to solve a problem with the script, and almost always this or that concrete idea or a thought that I had almost always comes in and then fits this pattern and completes it. And this is very important because what I truly believe is that all of us, the filmmakers, the artists, we are here in the film, or in the cinema, not to tell stories, basically, because in a sense, just like language speaks us, the stories are there universally, and we act through those stories, and stories need not be told. And in a sense, telling stories is the most rudimentary and sort of the simplest form that any artist can basically call upon. And I think it was, I don't remember exactly, but I think it was in Leibniz's Ethics, I'm not sure, he mentions that there are basically 3 levels of consciousness, in a sense, and the most rudimentary, the simplest of it is imagination. And imagination being the simplest is because imagination is natural even to children. Children have great imagination, and it takes no effort. It should take no effort or very little effort to conjure beautiful worlds and to conjure beautiful stories. And of course, it takes a lot more effort, which is the second step, to develop some kind of intellect or some kind of analytical mind. And it takes effort. And that's what we try to apply to scripts or to the working process of the film when we try to work in the film. But funny enough, he says that the highest form of knowledge is intuition. Again, it's very hard to define what intuition is. You can say that, I guess for me, the closest explanation, which is very close to my sensual understanding of it, is this kind of knowledge that arises without us being consciously in control of it, and then it leaves without leaving behind a trace. And it definitely is there, and it's undeniable, and it works. And so whenever I try to tackle a problem that I had with the script, I inevitably discovered that whatever was on the surface was just like an iceberg. If we imagine an iceberg, it was the tiniest visible particle of that overarching, or that grand idea that was hiding behind this tiny particle. And that tiny particle is what I mentioned. Could be one image, could be a sound, could be a sensation. And just because I believe that those images, let's call them images, those images are there in ourselves for a reason. They basically entail a whole host of experiences, the entire knowledge of that we carry through our lives. And at a certain moment, when the time is right, the top of the iceberg basically gives way, and we can dive a little bit deeper, and then the body of the iceberg is revealed. So in a sense, for me, the working process is going around this body of knowledge or body of sensation and trying to contemplate what it is trying to offer me. And this is another very important, I guess, insight or knowledge that I gained during the work of my film, City of the Sun. I don't know how many people have seen the film, but it's kind of, I guess it's a hybrid. That's what they call a hybrid film. it's something between documentary and which I really hate this delineation between documentaries and regular films. It's a film, and it's, you know, I've used documentary techniques, but it definitely is my own very subjective, very impressionistic take on the world of Ciatura. You know, what I try to do is during the work, I try to put myself in a position where I would have no choice but experience the world firsthand. And I moved to Ciatura for 6 months. I lived there alone, and I tried to make sense try to understand whether I had, first of all, moral right to make a film about something I had no firsthand knowledge of. I had no prior experience, even though, you know, I was born in Georgia, and Ciatura is right in the middle of Georgia. And second very technical thing that I actually love reading about different filmmakers, reading their technical experiences, and I hope there will be some technical questions, because all this, I guess, in quotes, philosophical talk could be interesting just for a little bit, but then really, I myself, I learned so much about the world of cinema through understanding how different filmmakers approach technically the film, how they made it, and then it actually revealed the whole underlying philosophy behind their films. So, and so on the technical side, that I was forced to go there alone and live in the city alone because I had no money, and it was my first film as a filmmaker, and obviously in retrospect I realize it, and I have no qualms about it. No one was willing to give me money. No one was willing to trust a first-time filmmaker, especially considering the fact that when you're trying to get money, they always ask you to write a screenplay, which is, I think, a little bit ridiculous when it comes to a documentary film screenplay, which was a mystery then how I could write a screenplay about a documentary film and still be considered something more or less objective. And obviously, looking at my writings, what I sent to different funds, you know, they were pure musings and my pure sort of, I don't know, what I would like to do and my theoretical, I guess, ideas about film. And obviously no one was willing to give me money, which is fair enough. But because of lack of money, which turned out to be a huge luxury, basically, I was forced into doing nothing for very long stretches of time. And that turned out to be extremely beneficial. And that gave me, on a physical level almost, that gave me a very particular and very valuable piece of knowledge. And that was contemplation. Because, you know, we hear a lot in today's cinema, especially documentary cinema, about observation, how how filmmakers go, you know, they go into this environment and they try to observe without being noticed, and they try to observe without being influential on the processes. And I don't agree. I'm completely against that, basically, because first of all, we can talk about this if it's interesting at all. I really don't believe in the, like I said, in the delineation of documentary films and then films in general, because, you know, just to be precise, what I mean is as soon as the observer who is behind the camera puts the camera somewhere, the documentary aspect of the world ceases to exist. And I think if we are truly looking for documentary footage, it's probably in the police departments looking at traffic, and that's it. Once we take it out from there and make a cut once, or once we place the camera, the documentary world ceases to exist. But
I'm sorry, there's literally a question about that. So it's an anonymous attendee, but he or she is asking, could you please talk about montage process in your film? As I myself could say that your documentary film is more montage like fiction film than documentary one, which of course has different influence on audience. So like to continue the subject that you're on, could you answer him?
Yes, great, a great question. So just to, I will continue and via this, I guess the idea of contemplation, I can get to that, and that's a very good question. And basically through my forced idleness, through not being able to do anything because I was alone, we had no money, and before we actually got funding and before I was able to bring the crew, I was forced to contemplate the environment without being able to film it. Mm-hmm. And what it meant to me and how I realized is that contemplation versus observation, there's a huge chasm between this is, if you look at the surface, these two terms, they seem very similar, but there is a world of difference between them. So in a very technical way, things that seemed to me a certain way after observing them once, by passing or by being in a certain moment, after several times of observing them again, and just physically being in that space for long stretches of time without judging what I was seeing, a complete new reality would open up. A much more interesting reality that I was able to, first of all, observe on the surface, and I now realize a much deeper and more interesting reality that I would have been able to conjure or write. And so this process of contemplation is probably the cornerstone of my process as a filmmaker. This is one of the most important aspects of my philosophy about cinema. So now to get back to the question, because I didn't know, I had no preconceived idea about Giatura or preconceived idea of what I wanted to get from the city, of what I would be able to end up with in terms of footage. I couldn't plan the shoot. Basically, I couldn't have a story that, I didn't have a protagonist that I knew was going through some kind of ordeal, as it is usually, preconceived dramaturgically. I didn't know whether they would start from point A and then what the point B would be. Forget about point Z. I had no idea. And most of the time, because the money was coming in small, bits and pieces, me and my crew, we were basically spending most of the time with our protagonists and being extremely close with them, without camera, without any planning. Maybe, we were mostly talking or drinking sometimes and just, sort of talking about life. And through that, I was able to get a very clear sense of what their daily life and routine was like. And so even though I had no idea of what I would end up with in terms of footage, I had a very good understanding, a clear idea of what kind of film I wanted to make. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to make an analytical film. I didn't want to make a social film. I wanted to make something that had that would bring emotional knowledge, and I'm going to talk about that. Instead of pure analytical knowledge, I wanted to have something that would bring emotional knowledge. So at the end, we had a lot of footage, many. I don't know. I don't. To this day, I don't know how many hours we had, but the editing itself took about a year. And that is exactly because, there was no script and no clear idea of what I was going after, except the sensual side and except the experiential side that I knew definitely and clearly how it was supposed to be. And so the main challenge in the editing, so what we did is basically we approached editing from many different angles. We tried all known I guess, techniques. We tried just watching the footage on the timeline, cutting it up, and seeing what we end up with. That didn't work. We tried to create stories, conventional stories. We tried to basically try to play with associative montage, and it didn't work. And it's very, when you end up in that situation, it's very telling. There's a well-known sort of a saying that you should listen to the material that you have, and you cannot really intellectually understand what it means. It's just like, okay, this is fine, I'm going to listen to the material, but we don't know what it means until actually you try to force the material that you have into a shape that it cannot be forced into, and then it unravels, and it just unravels, and it doesn't work, and it's dead, and it doesn't breathe. And basically, by method of error and trial, and even tribulations, where I had lost all kinds of hope, and thanks to my editor, who was just really cool and calm throughout the whole process, we understood that in some takes, in some sequences, and I have some sequences that I knew beforehand that I wanted to shoot with a long take, not because of technical sort of prowess that I wanted to display, but because there are a couple of scenes in the film where the protagonist actually physically walks from one world where he's a miner, and he physically walks in this uniform, and he physically walks through a different world into the theater, and we see this physical transformation, basically, and then there is another shot. And so when we looked at this kind of shots, we understood that when they were long enough, some kind of emotion was being accumulated. And then we started to, pin things and build things around it. And we understood that each section of the film should be an episode in which a kind of emotional knowledge is accumulated, and it doesn't have to, there doesn't have to be a story, there doesn't have to be a conventional development, doesn't have to be a conventional dramaturgical or narrative spin. And that freed us actually completely from restraints. We just understood that we have to arrive at some kind of emotional knowledge that is being born, and then we can move on to the next episode. And so these chunks were born. And it was a very, once we understood, it was, I think, 5 or 6 months of trying, of building different blocks, of building different, I think, maybe 8 or 9 different versions of film we built. And, I was feeling a little bit under pressure because my editor, he's from Brazil and he lives in São Paulo. Mm-hmm. And, he came to Georgia and he lived with me, with my family. And obviously, I was thinking about his life. He has a family there and all these things. But again, we put everything aside, and we didn't know how long it would take, but it was about 5 or 6 months, and after that, it went a little faster, basically. So
another question was, how did you settle about who would be the main protagonist? Because you talked about this intuition, and then watching this material, and they want to know how did you settle about your main protagonists?
Sure. That's a funny story, actually.
Ooh, nice.
So when I first arrived to the city, if people, whoever saw the film, when I first arrived to the city, I found a vantage point. I found a point that was a little bit higher than the rest of the city. There are mountains, there are canyons in Shiatura, very beautiful. Because I wanted to take in the atmosphere and see what it looks like from above. And I was there with a friend of mine who is not a filmmaker. He just drove me there, and the first place that we went up to and the first image that I saw is actually the first opening image of the film. And that was the point where, that was the place to which I came back and I filmed. It was one of the last days of filming, actually, but it wound up to be the first opening image. And why I'm including this prelude is because what I saw there and what I felt and the senses that I had actually defined how the entire film would be for me. It actually defined at that moment what the world was to me personally, subjectively, because I realized that the world in front of me was, first of all, extremely magical in a childlike sense, not in a magical realism sense, not in a sort of intellectual sense. It was basically a world that was swallowed by jungle, and in that jungle there was mystery to me, and through that jungle I could see those enormous, huge, half-demolished buildings of Soviet architecture just, peering out. And I had a very clear sensation. I told my friend that this looks like a former alien colony. Basically, these aliens came here and they were looking for something. They built these enormous structures and they extracted all the resources, and then they just left. And they left behind these amazing buildings, these huge buildings that we're unable to utilize. Because actually that's what I felt in the city, because people had no relation to those buildings. They were walking around them or, doing their small chores and, basically working like ants in a sense, without controlling those buildings and without controlling the nature, actually, because the nature swallowed up everything. And so precisely because there was this enormity of and the difficulty of apprehension of the vastness of what's going on in front of me, and the sheer human misery actually that I saw there, that I realized that perhaps I don't have a moral right to make a film, and that's why I decided to move there and live there for several months, which turned into 6 months, to see whether I could make a film. And I had no understanding. It was my first film. I had no understanding what to do. I tried actually to do casting, like usual casting, and a lot of people came. Maybe I saw 300 to 500 people, I don't remember. And I stopped filming the casting sessions after a while, because I saw that everybody was, not in a bad way, but everybody was lying or pretending, because they heard that there is a filmmaker, they're going to make a film. And so everybody would come and they would have a preconceived understanding of what the film is. They wanted to be in the film of their own imagination. So I couldn't understand whether they were saying what was true about their lives, etc., etc. And so funny enough, what's funny is that I think it was the last few weeks that I had left, because I was running out of money, and last few weeks I had left in the city, and I met an amazing person who became he's a doctor by profession, but he became our producer on the ground. Zurab Kapanadze, he's an older gentleman, an amazing, wonderful person, and he was my stalker, he was my guide, he was doing everything there. And I basically confessed that I don't know, maybe there is no film, and I might go back. And he organized a sort of like a going away party for me in a restaurant. I'm very uncomfortable with too many people. I'm uncomfortable with restaurants and Georgian traditions and all this, but I had to go. And I went there, and they had closed the entire restaurant. It was a huge restaurant just for this party. And in that restaurant, there was Zurab, the main protagonist, who is the musician and the demolitions guy who destroys buildings. And he was actually doing his job. He was hired to perform for us. He was there singing. And obviously, I've never seen him. I didn't know him. And it was it was a very, I don't know, it was a very strange, yeah, I'm Georgian and I know that Georgians hire musicians, but it was a very strange thing because whenever we wanted to talk, my host would basically make a sign and tell him to be quiet, and then make a sign and so he could sing. And it was, it was a kind of a weird feeling. And apparently Zurab overheard my host talking about the film, and they said, well, we hope that you can still make a film. Chiatura needs to be documented and all these things. So when the party was over, he came up to me, Zurab himself, and he said, I overheard you, and I might have a story. I think my life could be interesting enough so that, maybe at least you want to talk to me. And I said, well, tell me what do you have to say? And he began just describing his daily routine. And instantly I had this sensation, okay, this is another guy. Georgians, we're all artists. And, this is another guy with a nice story. But I was fascinated enough to ask him to take me home like the next day. And I met him. And he basically took me around, his route, his usual route. And I was blown away. I was literally blown away. And he said, I want to be in the film if you think I'm interesting enough. And that was when I understood that, okay, maybe now I have a moral right to be here. Maybe I have moral right to make a film because somebody literally invited me into their life and into their home. So that's how I found him. And Archil was another amazing character. He's in theater. I knew about him. Truth be told, I knew about him from some TV reportage or news, but I didn't want to meet or see him because that would have been the easiest, and I don't know, that would have been just too easy, I guess. So after I met Zurab, then I said, okay, now I can go and talk to him and see whether he has a crazy, unbelievable story and life. Right. And then the girls, and that was another sort of like funny story.
Right. So we have another question.
Sure.
Why did you use a quote from Bebkhist Qaosani? What was the message? It's a little bit different from our previous questions, but nonetheless.
Yeah, there is no message, to be honest with you. There is no message. I really don't believe in messages, and I really believe in the death of the author, basically with his or her work. So when the work is finished, the author dies with the work in sort of in the Barthian way, in a sense that we don't control what happens to the film, because it can be interpreted in multitude of ways. And so I was very aware that if I put this quote there, because it's so dear and it's so important to us and it's part of our DNA, that obviously some people would have some questions or maybe some notions or some preconceived ideas. To be honest with you, of course, on some level, I know why it's there, although I'm not going to say why it is there. But what's more important is the vibration. Is the vibration of those words as it's read by Zurab Lipshidze. I tried several different people who would read it, professionals, non-professionals, and when I heard him read it, especially for our film, I realized that it should be there. It was no question about it. Just on a very primitive level, I guess, the words of devotion. I mean, the idea of devotion, the idea of love, of pure love between human beings, the idea of going to hell for someone and back, and that actually is the music at the end on the titles is actually about that. On some, it resonated in a sense that it was a reflection of Ciatura as well, because, if any of you have been in Ciatura, you can see the utmost devastation, it's pure misery in a sense, but the life force that is within people is so strong. And love and friendship and the willingness to not only to live but to win and to triumph over life. I mean, not life, but over the challenges that life offers. It was basically a reflection of that. But it was, honestly, trust me, I didn't analyze it too much. As soon as I got that kind of feeling and sensation, I knew that it was right for it to be there.
Right, so you always go with your gut. That's what you're saying, that the intuition and gut and emotion is more important.
It's like, yeah, I mean, I don't want people to misunderstand. Obviously, building a structure, a film structure, is analytical work. It's intellectual work. Writing something is, yes, of course. But what we end up with is, the end result is the multitude of choices that we make. What is a film if it's just the choices that we're left with and the choices that we make that give us the final work. And that's when I think intuition comes into play. How do you make the choice? Because obviously we're very limited in our education, in our expertise of certain subjects, we'll always be limited. And so once we rely basically on our intellect, that's when we lose. That's when we definitely lose. And I really believe that all of us, all human beings, we are all connected. We're all connected through, you can call it radio waves, it doesn't matter. This is my very serious belief that intuition or higher knowledge or imagination, it does not reside with us. Basically, we have access to it, temporarily or for however length there is. We have access to it, and basically anything, just going back again to the iceberg principle, just anything what we can think of, what we can imagine already exists in the universe. Otherwise, it would be impossible for us to imagine or think of it. And so the idea of trusting and developing one's, like, my intuition is I guess the biggest mysteries and also the primary goals of me as a filmmaker.
Right. Could you talk a little bit more about, because you talk about the psychology a lot in your interviews, about human beings, being interested in human beings. Could you talk about the people that you work with, because you tend to work with same people? For instance, you work with Dea on most of the projects, Arseni, and a lot of people. So could you elaborate on how important it is to have people that you trust in? Maybe even you don't have to talk to them and there's a telepathical or, that kind of connection between you guys, radio waves, like you said. How important it is to have this kind of trust in people and collaborative, because making film is collaborative work.
Yes.
If you could speak up.
Sure, absolutely. I think it's the most important aspect of cinema, of filmmaking. Think about it. There is no other artistic endeavor that on such a grand scale unites various people from various professions. There's theater, obviously, there are many different professions, but film is in sheer scale. It just, trumps anything else. Obviously, we're talking about a different scale, but people who are your closest collaborators, to me, they are they are as, I cannot, overemphasize it. They're as important as, you should realize that they're as important as your ideas. And in a sense, for me, it's very important to understand the psyche of that particular person than his or her technical abilities first. And through understanding that, obviously you want to work with the best, obviously you want to, you wish the best for your film, that's why you want to work with the best. But for me, understanding the psychology, and not only the psychology, but the emotional constitution of that person is more important, because when you have someone talented, you can teach him anything or her anything, basically, because you can spend some time and learn yourself, and then that's how we are in the world. But the character of the person defines their destiny, and defines, I guess, what, how, if you're going to kill each other, or if you're going to, live through this process. But more importantly, technically, when I have that kind of understanding of how that person functions on an emotional level, I am able to define my own responsibility toward the freedom that I give to that person. Obviously, they're looking at you as a director to, for guidance. And, it's very important to, of course, when someone is asking you for guidance, it's very important to give them some advice or guide them. But there is a very fine line between over-advising and under-advising. And if you're over-advising, you might kill that creative spirit or the talent that the person has and has to offer to you and the film, which is almost always much more imaginative and much more creative than what you could just think of alone when you're writing or imagining something. So that kind of imagine guiding someone in the physical world, but not touching them. It's sort of like you're trying to lead them somewhere, and that's, I think, understanding the psyche and the emotional constitution of the person is important for that reason, basically. So it's a process until the end. You can fight 1,000 times, make up 1,000 times, and it's really like a family at the end.
And it continues to be so. Thank you for answering that question.
Sure.
There is another one.
Please.
You please, and I know the answer to this because in one of the interviews you speak about this, but let's answer anyways. Could you please talk about authors, directors who influenced you as an artist the most? Let's see if your answer is different right now, because I remember you saying that of course, you've been influenced by many artists, by many directors, but you don't particularly remember the films themselves, but the emotion behind them. So is that the same answer right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there were so many. Right. There's so many, and there's so many in a sense that they leave the traces, and some of them leave traces that are more readily felt or more visible, or others less visible. But it's the particular function of my brain. It's just I'm very bad with numbers, extremely bad with factual dates. I'm horrible with that. So when I watch something or when I read something, I almost instantly, once it's over, I forget completely. And that helps me in a way not to be bound to certain structures, or not to be, in love with something that I cannot get over with, when the time comes. And because we know that obviously when you learn filmmaking, you learn the alphabet, you learn all the technicalities, you learn all the technical aspects of it, but we all know that once you're on the actual spot, you're trying to shoot the film, everything goes out of the window.
Right.
There's nothing left there's nothing left in your brain that's intellectual or philosophical or anything like that, or your attitudes about cinema or what you want to make, they all go out of the window. There's nothing, and you're just left there and people staring at you, and you're there and you have to make a decision. And that's when your animal part comes in. So you don't think about Antonioni or whoever, however intellectual you want to present yourself when you're relaxed and calm at home, and when you can analyze everyone. But to be more precise, I want to say that cinema came in very late in my life. I think I was 30 or maybe 31. And before that, I didn't take it even, and I didn't put in even an ounce of seriousness into cinema. Of course, I watched films, but to me, they were just not even entertainment. They were something ephemeral that was, that existed there in the world, and I partook in it. But to me, more important as inspiration is literature and music than cinema. So in that sense, I guess the psycho-emotional impact that I feel and that drives me, is the primal source is before when I was 30 years old, and before I actually realized that I wanted, or whatever I had in my head and whatever I was writing was not literature, but just scenes, and that could be translated into film. So.
Right, there is a sentence like this: the film is the most expensive way to find yourself, most expensive medium where you can find yourself. Is that what happened after 30 years? You were like, existential crisis, let's identify it.
Yeah, well, no, I don't actually. That's a good saying, but I don't agree with that, because I don't think that the artists or the filmmakers in this sense should be doing film to find themselves. That it's an useless, because you can find yourself by sitting under a tree and drinking wine. You don't have to waste other people's time trying to analyze yourself. I think filmmaking is a much more serious endeavor than all of us, like including me. We forget this. It's much more serious endeavor, and it is as serious as medicine, as mathematics, as anything else in the world. It is as serious, because when you're making a film, you're exploring the world, and ideally, even though it doesn't, because the cinema is dependent on money and financing and all of those things, it doesn't happen all the time. But ideally, what you're doing is you're tackling a certain problem that exists in the world. And you're tackling, as an artist, as we all, as artists, as scientists, as as whoever, in the government, the politicians, we are all circling around this, I guess, what I would call a center of objectivity, where the world exists, and the world has many different layers, and that's what that's what we are designed to do, to uncover those layers and actually to tackle those problems. And hopefully and ideally, it's not, there are many problems in the world which are social and on the I guess one spectrum, and there are philosophical problems on the other, and everything in between. And in my opinion, all of these people in science or philosophy or film or politics, we're all trying to solve the same issues, but using a different language and different approach. And I think in its essence, it's a lot more serious than trying to find yourself, which I think is a process that, it doesn't stop until you die, but.
So what happens when global pandemic hits and you are no longer able to enjoy this very important, as you said, thing as cinema in theaters, and maybe you don't even get to watch that film because, you know, it's the director or producer doesn't want to release it. So what happens in those times that we'll live right now, because you create and there's this worlds that you create and then it's finished and then you want it to be, you know, audience to actually enjoy it. So what do you think about right now, what's happening right now, and how important it is for you to audience to see your film and have the reaction?
Well, you know, it's a really good question. I really don't believe in art for art's sake. Everything that we do is because other human beings exist, and people need people. And art by itself doesn't exist, and then trees really don't need us, and animals don't really need us. What we need is, as people, we need other people. So there's a very important aspect to being social and going to the movies, but to the cinemas. But to be honest with you, my primary education in film was by stealing films through torrent sites. Because, you know, I had, obviously I couldn't buy all of the hundreds and hundreds of films that I saw. It would be impossible. Most of them were, you know, not in theaters. They were from people who were long dead before, you know, I found out about, you know, cinema. So, and obviously I was watching those films on a small screen. And obviously the impact that they had, the energy that was left after watching those films on a small screen was no less different. I'm sure it's not easy to quantify or to qualify what's better or what's worse, but it's really it is what I really believe in. When you're going to see watch a film on a big screen, it's sort of like it should be a conscious step. Because otherwise it becomes as routine and as banal as watching something on a computer. Because if you go there and if you go to the cinema and you do it you do it routinely, you do it all the time, there's a danger basically that you're not appreciating it for what it is. In that sense, it's much more important to have a conscious decision, to make a conscious decision to watch a film and be in the environment and dive into the film on a computer screen, then go to the cinema and hear people chew and eat and talk and drink and completely disregard, you know, what's going on in front. You know, because obviously, like we know from the technical point of view, what going to the cinema, what cinema means, like why we are mesmerized when we are in the cinema. You know, it's called persistence of vision, when your brain tries to splice into one coherent thing all the 24 dead picture frames a second. Your brain is busy working, making those dead frames alive, and that's why you go into a slight trance, right? That's very sort of, you know, easy, I guess, like a simple technical aspect of cinema. But when you're surrounded with people who are there for a different purpose, I'm not sure how it's better watching a film on a large screen than being alone and being completely devoted to that experience at home. But I think you know, it's going to pass, and I don't know. I truly believe that it's not going to change anything. As soon as it passes, we have a vaccine. In a couple of months, we'll forget about it. You know, there have been a lot worse things like Spanish flu and World War II, and you know, things that we remember. But you know, it's going to pass in just a few months. I truly believe that.
Optimistic outlook on COVID-19. So you're saying that watching film is an isolated thing in itself. And I would like to remind everyone that from Monday in 2 days, the audience is going to be able to see 20 films from this year's festival circuit. So tune in to be able to see all the films that our festival programmers have chosen for us. I think this is a great note to wrap it up. If you would like to say something to finish up our hour of talking, that would be amazing.
Well, I mean, nothing special, just it's been great. Thank you so much. And I hope that, again, I just want to underline that I hope that, I was not perceived as knowing something for sure or definitely, and having access to some kind of higher truth that other people don't know. I'm also exploring, and I'm also in the process of understanding the process itself. And I'm also, in the same journey. So I was very happy to share my thoughts, and I hope that it wasn't, too daunting or too boring. So.
On the contrary, thank you so much for being so humble, as well as, great at what you do. Thank you to the audience, and thank you, Rati, once again for being with us during
Very much appreciated.
Goodbye. Thank you.